Hello everyone! Some of the most watched videos on my channel that I have since taken down were about how to manage stress during your PhD. So I thought today I would talk about 7 things that I would have liked to know before I started my PhD. It's things that I think would have been important to know and that aren't quite common knowledge, at least as far as I know. So without further ado, let's jump right into 7 things that I would have liked to know before I started my PhD. So the first thing is that what is written on paper doesn't necessarily match reality. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is if you go and you enter a PhD program, you will usually get an offer letter, you will be under a specific set of rules, and these rules are usually written down. And that's all on paper, right? It's like written rules, written offer letter, written whatever. And often what you see in terms of rules on paper doesn't really match reality. Often people have found ways around these rules or what is actually in your benefits package or what has been offered to you in your offer letter. Yes, it's technically there, but it's really hard to use. So if you actually want to know how the graduate program functions in reality and how it works in reality and not on paper, you have to talk to current students. So for us that's easy because they invite you for an admissions workshop, and even now with the online admissions workshop they make sure that you have opportunities to interact with current students. But if your chosen program doesn't do that, just go and find some people on the internet who are in the program. Guys, it's 2021. I'm sure you can find some people who are in the program and cold email them, write them a message on LinkedIn, on Facebook, whatever your preferred social media is, and ask them about being in the program. Ask them anything and everything you want to know about being in the program. So the second point I have is location matters more than you think. So in my case, I visited Okinawa before I started my graduate program, and I visited as part of the admissions workshop. Back then in pre-COVID times, they were flying everyone over for interviews, and it was a good opportunity to see the island. And I knew back then that I wasn't really vibing with the island or island life or not being in a big city, but I thought I could just get accustomed to it. And also it is a beautiful, gorgeous island, so I thought, well, maybe being such a nice, gorgeous island and everything, the institute being in such a nice location, I can just get used to not being in like at least a small scale city. I can just get used to living on the island. And the reality is you usually just know whether a place is for you or not. You go there and you feel whether you vibe with the place or not. And I thought, well, how bad can it be? It's just 5 years. It's, you know, I will be working a lot anyway. I will be doing a PhD. But the reality is 5 years is a long, long time. And The other reality is a PhD is really, really stressful, and you need to have like some outside things that you can do and that you love to do to keep you balanced and mentally healthy. So yeah, by all means, often people think you should just go wherever the best program is that you got accepted into, independent of location. And I saw it the same way when I started my PhD. And I also saw it that it really doesn't matter that much. I clearly was wrong about that. And I now think that location matters a lot more than I thought before I started my PhD. And I would highly recommend that if you don't vibe with a place, don't go there, go somewhere else, and you will probably be happier. Point number 3 is that everything depends on your lab. So it basically doesn't matter which graduate program you enter. Of course, it comes with a specific set of rules, how to graduate, specific benefits, blah, blah, blah. But really, what everything comes down to is your lab, not your graduate program. You will spend a lot of time with your specific lab, and if you don't go along with your PI or people in your lab, or it's just not a good place to be for whatever reason, you will have a tough time during your PhD. So how do you know whether a lab is for you? If it is a graduate program where you don't get accepted into a specific lab but into the program, and then you choose a lab later on, and you have some labs in mind, talk to people who are currently in the lab to get a feel for how the lab operates, what the vibe is, whether you can see yourself becoming part of that lab. And if there are 2 or 3 options you have in mind, and you talk to people in all of these labs and you can't really see yourself in any of these 2 or 3 labs, maybe you should go somewhere else. If you are lucky enough that it is an American style program, you will have rotations and you can see whether or not you vibe with a lab. And if you don't vibe with the lab, don't enter the lab. And if there is no alternative choice, by all means go and find another graduate program to do your PhD. It doesn't matter that you lost 1 year, just cut your losses, go somewhere else. Because remember, you have to stay with that lab for another 4 years. And 4 years is also a long time. So now obviously if you apply to a specific lab, which is usually the case in Europe, where you will start your PhD with a specific lab, so you will enter a specific lab right away. It's a different situation, but again, talk to the people in the lab. If possible, visit the lab and see if you vibe with the lab. Have a list of questions with things that are important for you, and talk with current members of the lab or labs that you would consider to join if it's a graduate program where you enter the program and you choose a lab later on. Point number 4 is that you need to have a support network. So this is so important. A PhD is tough, physically and mentally, and you need to have a support network to keep you grounded and sane. And the reason I put this on the list, it's kind of obvious that you need a good support network in place when you do a PhD, but the reason I put it on the list is that if you consider moving away from where you currently live, or you consider moving to a different country where you don't speak the language, you have to be certain that you will be able to build yourself a support network, and that means you have to know what kind of person you are. So now I had an amazing support network in place, but I also have a hard time making friends, and so it wasn't easy for me starting out. You have to make a conscious effort to build a support network, because you will need it later during your PhD, along your PhD journey. So now the fifth point I have is to not lose your identity. So you work a lot during your PhD, and I have seen a lot of people who dropped doing any hobbies, any outside interests they had. And I was a lot like that myself. I would prioritize my work over everything. So yeah, I wouldn't take any time to do things I loved. I just wouldn't take the time, because I felt I didn't have the time. And looking back, or coming out of my PhD, I felt like I had lost a part of myself, just because I had not done things I loved besides research. So I love my work, I love doing research, but I'm not just a researcher. I do have other interests. I love to paint. I like to sew. Like, I have a sewing machine again. I had one during my PhD. I used it 0 times, I think. No, that's not true. I did some fixes of clothes. So I usually play at least one sports, and took me a good time. So I started to kickbox during my PhD. I also love scuba diving, and I was on a subtropical island, and I just wouldn't take the time to go scuba diving. I started to make a conscious effort to take time off out of my day to go to kickboxing classes. But again, there were times where I would prioritize my work over going to kickboxing class to get a workout and punch out all of my frustration. And I got even more stressed out, and it didn't help. So yeah, don't lose yourself. Take time for your hobbies. And honestly, if you have to schedule them into your timetable, or put them onto your to-do list, or whatever it takes, do it, because otherwise you will lose yourself, and that's not the point of doing your PhD. Now, point number 6 is to have a plan. So what do I mean by that? Well, when you do your PhD, usually no one really tells you how to get from point A, which is starting your PhD, to point B, which is finishing your PhD. And it's up to you to have a plan to make it happen. And that's like half of the thing I'm talking about. Usually, also, things don't stop at point B, which is finishing your PhD. You also have point C, which is what's next, what is coming after your PhD, what is your end goal. You need to figure out what your goal is, what you want to do after your PhD, and you need to have a plan how to get there. You just need to have a plan in place, so that you can finish your PhD on time, but also so that you're qualified for whatever you want to do afterward. And really, it's up to you to establish this plan. Go, have a plan, figure it out, do it, finish your PhD, and move on to whatever it is that you want to do afterward. point number 7, and that's a point that mainly applies if you do want to stay in academia. But point number 7 that I have is that there are many more opportunities to publish besides full research articles. I wasn't aware of that when I started my PhD. No one told me. And there is this mantra to publish early and publish often. Because in general, the earlier you start to publish during your PhD, the smoother your academic career will go, and that can be publishing anything. And the opportunities I'm talking about, some are obvious. So review articles are very obvious popular choice if you do a literature review for your PhD thesis anyway, and you do it early on in your PhD, publish that as a review article. There are, well, I'm not sure if this applies to every field, but at least in my field, there are many articles where you can submit review articles and they don't have to be invited. The other thing is, and again, this applies particularly to my field, I'm not sure if these opportunities exist in other fields. The Journal of Neuroscience calls it a journal club article, and the Journal of Neurophysiology calls it Neuroforum. And basically, these articles are very, very short articles that review another article that was previously published in that journal and embed it into a broader context of the current literature. And I wasn't aware that these things existed, and they are brilliant, brilliant opportunities for early career researchers, also PhD students and postdocs, to publish some articles. They give you writing experience, and they are very valuable to write and publish, in my opinion. So yeah, publish early, publish often, use these opportunities. Well, find these opportunities and use these opportunities. All right, so these were my 7 things that I would have liked to know before I started my PhD, and that I just didn't know. And I hope if you're a new PhD student or someone who is considering starting a PhD very soon, that they are helpful for you. If you do get some use out of them, or if you just like this video in general, leave me a thumbs up. Consider to subscribe to my channel for more videos about being a PhD student and starting your PhD, as well as other kind of videos that hopefully you will also like. And I will see you next week. Bye!